Afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Tandi Souley. I am a professor of higher education in the Department of Organizational Leadership. I also serve as a faculty fellow in the graduate school. So welcome again to today's workshop, Inclusive Teaching Toolkit, Strategies for Teaching Assistants and Future Faculty. This session is part of our graduate student professional development series. This series is designed to provide you with the skills and tools needed to navigate graduate school and to advance your career. Today, we are delighted to welcome our presenter, Dr. Sarah Hosch, Faculty Director for the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning. She holds a PhD in biochemistry, molecular biology, and biophysics, and is a special instructor in the Department of Biological Sciences. She is an expert instructor and leader in innovative teaching practices. So without further ado, welcome Dr. Sarah Hosch, who will lead this important session.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Welcome. I'm super happy to be here. I love working with graduate students. I do teach in the Department of Biological Sciences, so I've been working with graduate students in that program for quite some time. And I do want to mention that what we're going to talk about today actually came out of some work that I did with faculty in our Inclusive Teaching Academy, which we've run out of CETL for the last couple of years. And so I'd like to acknowledge the work of Gerard Madlambayan and Valance Washington, who are both professors in the Department of Biological Sciences. And what they did as a result of the Inclusive Teaching Academy was they recognized that there was a gap and a need for graduate students to have additional training in inclusive teaching techniques. So they found that there were some elements of what we talked about that might really resonate with graduate students and to help them become more successful, especially if you are an international graduate student, or if you really don't have a lot of teaching experience before you come to graduate school, or even as you're on your way out from graduate school. Sometimes you can start as new faculty and you still may not have a lot of practice in the classroom. So that's kind of where this started. And I'll kind of run through what we're going to do today. We're going to talk a little bit about what inclusive teaching is. We're going to talk about some strategies. We're going to do an activity related to identity, and then we'll come back for some key takeaways and resources. So I popped this comic up here. I think it's pretty funny. It says it's in the syllabus. You can think about whether or not this resonates with you. And so a student comes in and says, "What did we cover in class last week?" And the TA says, "It's in the syllabus." And then another student comes up and says, "What's the late homework policy?" And the TA says, "It's in the syllabus." And then we've got, "What are your office hours?" "It's in the syllabus." And "How will my grades be computed?" "It's in the syllabus." So I think we all can say that we've probably shared some experiences in the classroom that maybe have us frustrated, or we're not necessarily sure how to navigate. So how many of you guys have experience already teaching either at Oakland University or other college areas? One, couple, yes. All right. And how many of you don't have any experience at all and are maybe new to this? All right, and so we've got a few new people too. So I think what is great about this topic is it doesn't really matter where you are in your experience. There's always something new to learn, especially because our students are changing and we're changing. And so how we interact with our students and the environments that we create changes along with us. So to start, if we want to really think holistically about what inclusive teaching is, it really just says that all students, regardless of their backgrounds or identity, are valued and respected and have equitable access to learning. So when we think about this concept, we can think about the idea that it's not just saying that we have diversity in our content, or we have diversity in our classroom. It's actually about actively including and valuing all students. So it is an active thing that we do as instructors to create this environment for all students to feel valued. It really addresses the needs of students with all types of backgrounds, learning modalities, and abilities. So this might even include students, neurodiverse students. It includes students of different backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, or where they even grew up, really all wide ranges of varied backgrounds. If we think about this concept of equitable teaching, which often goes hand in hand with inclusive teaching, what the University of Michigan describes this as is really a step further where we take an active role in addressing systemic barriers in higher education. So this, what we're doing today, is one of these examples where we're trying to change our culture on campus to really make sure that everyone understands what inclusive teaching really means and how we can do that effectively in the classroom. Okay, so if we think about what it takes to be successful at inclusive teaching, this really does require us to do a couple of things that are kind of hard. And so today we're going to do some things that are hard, and we're going to do some thinking, and we're going to do some sharing. And if you are familiar with a lot of the sort of general learning philosophies, we know that you're going to learn best when you are challenged a little bit and when maybe there's a little stress involved. And we're going to do a little bit of that today. We're going to have to consider your prior assumptions and your implicit biases. And an implicit bias is something that you might have that you don't even realize that you have. It's a thought that you might think about a group of people that you may not even realize that you have that thought, and it might not actually be true. So we can think about how those affect your behavior, your interactions with students. We also want you to think about how to be aware of issues that come up in the classroom so that you can respond appropriately, and how you can understand the diversity of your students. And again, the overall goal is really to create this environment where all students feel equally valued. So I know this sounds like a lot, and it is, and we're not going to be able to do everything in detail today. So what we're going to do is take a snapshot of a couple of things that I think are really important and can get us going, and I'll provide you with some resources for you to dive into this more in your own time and in your own way. So we're going to look at 4 ways we can use these principles to become more effective instructors. So we're going to think about your own identity as an individual and a graduate student, your students' identities, your classroom environment, and also how you teach. Okay, so what we're going to do first, before we get into this, is we're really going to focus on our identity. And this was actually the main piece that came out of the work that we did in the Inclusive Teaching Academy that drove this presentation, which was to really understand that sometimes we don't think enough about ourselves and who we are and how that affects our behavior with other individuals. So if you're not familiar with an identity wheel, this is a picture of an identity wheel. And there's instructions if you want to look at this further. But we're going to take about 5 minutes, and we're going to have everyone individually complete their own identity wheel to whatever space you feel comfortable. So I'm going to just let you know right now that all of what we're going to do, because sometimes these things are about us and we can be sensitive to our own identities and sharing with others, only share what you feel comfortable with sharing. But maybe take the time to prompt yourself to maybe step a little bit farther than maybe you would normally. So as you think about your own identity wheel, and what we're going to do is you're going to notice there are, looks like a pie, there are a number of different areas, and I want you just to write in some words or just think about how you relate to these core pieces of identity. And then when you're done, we're going to divide up and we're going to share a little bit about what identities we think have had the most impact on how others perceive you, especially thinking about students. So your identity and how students might perceive you based on your identity and how that's affected you. Thanks everybody for participating. I hope that you learned a little something about yourself and maybe about some experiences from other TAs. I do have one other sort of follow-up question. We're going to do this using a Mentimeter poll, so you can just kind of type it right in, and I will show all the responses as they go in. So I'll give you a second. You can scan this, but this will also be up on the presentation when I click over. Okay, so a couple of people have responded. If you can't respond in the Menti, you can respond in the chat also. But I think one of the things that's coming out is student confidence, less engagement. So really thinking about how your identity, yourself, might influence how you're able to interact with students. Um, this is a great comment. Students learn best when they relate with you. So this is actually one of the things to think about when you're thinking about your identity is then how do you use your identity in a way to help relate to your students. So we're going to move on and talk a little bit about that. You can continue to put things in the chat as you come up with that, but this will we'll kind of go right through this too. So one of the ideas that I kind of want to bring home from this discussion is that you have your own story, your own background, and your own experiences that you're bringing into the classroom. Your perspectives are unique. They're different than faculty. So if you're a TA, what you've experienced is going to be different than what the faculty have experienced. And that allows you to connect with students in a different way. So you're going to have different connections with your students than your faculty will. One thing I hear a lot about from graduate students, though, is that they have something called imposter syndrome. Has anybody heard of that before? Okay, and how would you describe it?
Even though you have the capability and the expertise to be doing what you're doing, you still constantly doubt yourself because you are your own worst critic.
Yeah, so having self-doubt about your capabilities, feeling like you don't belong in that space is something that happens a lot with grad students that are TAs. One of the big reasons is because you're also still a student, right? So you're there to learn, you're part of your own program, and you're actively in that learning process, but you are also going to be the expert in a classroom of students. So you're kind of in that kind of middle range. And that can be really scary, but it's important to know that everyone's in the same boat when it comes to this. And your previous training and training that you get will help you be successful in the classroom because you are an expert in your area and you have to remind yourself of that. So what can you do to really take your identity and use this as a tool to help you interact and really create an inclusive environment? So every time you see one of these bubbles pop up where you see a quote, this is something that a graduate student has actually expressed in relation to this inclusive teaching training. And the quote here says, using personal stories to connect with them, I noticed to help them feel more confident when referring to her classroom. And this is an example of using a personal narrative to connect with students and that helps them feel more like they can connect with you. We've talked about assumptions before. This is really important when you think about your identity and where you're coming from and how that might influence how you then perceive others who might come from a different background. And we always need to practice thinking about what are we unconsciously thinking. We're going to use and take advantage of peers and mentors just like we just did. They're the ones that are really going to help you learn to grow and share their experiences. So one thing I hope you take away today is that even though it can be hard to talk about yourself, your background, the experiences that you have, sometimes it can be scary to share something that's happened in the classroom. We need to do that in order to learn from one another. For example, when I think about my identity and I think about how that's influenced my ability to do my job in the classroom, there's a few things that have happened to me. One is I am tall. I am the average height of a male, and I hear over and over again, it doesn't matter how friendly I am quote unquote intimidating. And so students will have a hard time necessarily coming in and talking to me right away just based on my height. And this is something I work really hard to overcome. Sometimes I might sit on a desk. Sometimes I walk around the room and I bring students into a conversation because I have learned that that's something that my identity just influences in terms of how I interact with students. As a female and as a mom, I've found that in the past and my age has also played a role in how my students perceive me and maybe thinking, oh, hey, because you're a mom, she's gonna maybe give me a little more chances or might treat me a little bit differently and compared to maybe another professor that has a different identity. And so that's something that I think about a lot is making sure that I use the parts of my identity that are important to me and I express them, but also that I can still do my job in the way and run the type of classroom that I want to run. And lastly, in terms of this imposter syndrome, really making sure that you're confident in your role as a TA or a new instructor if you are currently a postdoc, and thinking about how you are an expert and a learner, but to be confident in that, and that even if you don't feel that way the first day, you will gain that as you go through and as you talk to others. The next part I want to talk about is your student's identity. And if you look at just some information about OU students at OU, and these are undergrad demographics that you can get on our website from our Office of Institutional Research and Data Analytics. Each school is different. Okay, so this is what OU looks like. So when you leave here and you go teach somewhere else, your students' identities are going to be different than ours. And then you have to think about how that might affect how you teach. So for example, we know about 19% of our undergrads are here part-time. Okay, so they're part-time students. We know that 60% of our students are commuting more than 6 hours a week. And actually, if we look at some of those part-time students, we're going to find it's even more than that. We also know that about 19% of our undergraduates fall into or identify within a underrepresented minority identity. And we know that about 94% of our undergraduate students graduate and stay in Michigan. And in fact, 92% of our undergraduate population their home is in Michigan. So if you think about yourself, and I know that if you look at graduate students, this profile is very different. And you might find that, especially for international graduate students, coming in and understanding that the majority of your students are from Michigan is very different maybe than what you are used to being around in terms of the educational system. So if we think a little bit about our students, we also want to think about what challenges they might face. And there's two pieces to this that I want to talk about. The first one has to do with a survey that was given out to freshmen this past year. And actually the data from the last slide was also freshmen from 2024. I don't think we have it yet from 2025. The following concerns with their ability to complete a degree. Okay, so this is what students are saying is hard for them. What are they perceiving or thinking is going to be difficult as they enter into a degree program here? And what do you guys notice about this data? What is it? What jumps out to you? And does it make sense with what you think you see? So balancing work and college schedules is the first one. Why is that? A lot of our students are also working. So not only are they part-time students, but they might have full-time jobs. Does that affect how they interact with you and what their learning environment is for you in the classroom? Most definitely. If you have expectations that your students are going to be able to make it in on that short window of time that you have set aside for your office hours, you're going to find that's not the case because they might only be coming to school 2 days a week. Okay? They might only be able to do night classes because they have a full-time job during the day. Commuting can take hours. Some students commute an hour. Okay, if you have a policy that says if you are 5 minutes late to a lab, then you can't run the lab anymore. That could be a really large barrier for students that are commuting, especially in the winter semesters with bad weather. The next two on this list, physical, mental, and emotional well-being and funds, okay? These are massive stressors, right? Like we all know how we feel if we're not feeling good inside, if we can't get our exercise, if we're not eating and sleeping, and especially if we are under financial stress as well as any of these, right? So this can affect how students show up in your classroom and how they're able to complete the assigned work. So if you're in a class and you look out at a group of your students and you see a student who maybe has been absent for a couple of classes, or if you have a student who maybe hasn't turned in their assignments on time for a week or two. In your head, okay, if you think about implicit biases, you might have a judgment about that. You might say to yourself, well, maybe they just don't want to be here, or they don't like the work, or they just are lazy, aren't putting in the effort this semester. Okay, so what we see is only a behavior. What we see is just these simple things that are on the surface. And that's what we see. If you think about an iceberg, all you see is that tip of the iceberg that's out of the water. But in reality, what we don't see is all this stuff. It's all the life experiences. It's all these pieces of your students' identities that are going on that may influence their ability to show up in the way you expect them to in the classroom. Okay, that could be self-doubt and anxiety. It could be they don't know how to work in a group effectively. And so they don't want to come to class, or they sit in the back of the room because they're scared or nervous about how to actually do really successful group work. It could be that they have anxiety about their performance and being able to successfully get a grade for that class because they're worried about failing out of their major. And that is just so overwhelming for them that they are having trouble even working through that material. They might have to leave for work or health issues. We have students on campus that are taking care of their parents, that are the only ones that speak English in the family and have to drive family members to the doctor. And they're the only ones that are able to do that. So what looks to you like a long list of absences might be that that student actually has to take care of a family member, and they're the only ones that can do it. So taking the time to understand what's under the water, thinking about what could be there, makes a big deal, okay? I had a student who at one point told me, well, basically they missed an exam, okay? Now, if I had had an exam policy that said, all right, well, if you're not there and if you don't let me know ahead of time, then you don't get to retake the exam, it would have been a really big problem for this student. They emailed me and said, oh, I was in a car accident. A lot of instructors require a note or some evidence of that. I said, okay, come in and talk to me about it. When the student came in and talked to me, I found out that the only reason why they came to talk to me was because of how I approached them in the email and how I was willing to have a conversation. It turns out that it wasn't a car accident. It was a domestic abuse case. And that person was so embarrassed and scared to come in that they felt paralyzed by it all. But I opened up a door to make sure that student felt like they could talk to me, and we worked out a situation. We first ensured her safety and physical and mental health, and then we worked out the academic issues. So you don't see what's under the water all the time, and the more we think about it, the more successful we're going to be as instructors in the classroom. So what can you do? I have a handout for you guys that will be posted in a little while online. There's also a few copies here in the classroom, and it's going to give you way more information than what I'm giving to you right now, but I want to highlight a couple of key things. One of these we see a lot, which is financial concerns. And one thing that you might not know about is that we actually have a lot of things on campus, resources that students can take advantage of. So we have loaner laptops available for students. We have emergency funds available for students. We have a food pantry. We have clothes that are available for students who need a suit to go to an interview. So there's lots of different ways we can support students financially if they're struggling to meet those basic needs. The second example is explaining the hidden curriculum. Now, is this a term you're familiar with? Anyone online? About 30% of our undergraduate students are first generation students, which means neither one of their parents had a college education. Now, the impact of that is not always something that we might think about. For a lot of these students, they may not know how to navigate college life effectively because they didn't have anyone there to kind of teach them the tricks or to tell them what things mean. That could be anything from financial aid, understanding financial aid. It could be knowing what office hours are. It could be understanding even what we mean by critical thinking or classroom participation. Their high school experiences and any student's high school experience might be very different from the expectation in college. One thing that blows people's minds right now and is that, and I'll say my son who's in high school rarely has homework. I mean, maybe twice this whole year has had homework. He's a junior. Okay. He's never studied for an exam. They don't have textbooks, so they don't read at all. They don't, if I asked what a study skill was, or if I asked him how to take notes, he would not know how to do that because they're not taught and they're not expected to do it. And what they might do to prepare for an exam is to go through a worksheet that's been provided by one of the teachers. And then that might be what they use then. And then the exam looks kind of like that worksheet. Okay, so what does that tell us? If they're leaving high school without these skills, okay, but our expectations are here that they have all these skills, but they don't have all these skills, we've got a pretty strong mismatch. And it's not their fault. That isn't their fault. That is sort of the product of the educational system we're in right now. And we have to work in supporting the students to make sure that we can fill in those gaps so they do know what to do. So the hidden curriculum, there's a link here for you to take a look at, really helps us understand what things students might not necessarily get right away and that we might have to really kind of explain the ropes. If you think about it, it would be like being given an assignment, but literally no directions. And that someone just gives you something and expects you know how to complete it with no understanding of the task or purpose. That's how some students feel when they start at college. Sense of belonging is really important for our students. We want them to feel like they belong in some group. That could be a major, it could be a group in their dorm, it could be a club that they're a part of. That sense of belonging will help them be successful. It helps with persistence, it helps with retention, and it creates a community on campus. And so what we can do in our classroom is create a classroom community. The more types of group work, the more engagement you have, the more you get them to talk to one another and to you, the more you build that community and strengthen their sense of belonging. Flexibility, this is a tough one because I know a lot of people have strong feelings on this. Sometimes flexibility with deadlines can be helpful because it allows for some growth. So the way I tend to describe this is I have a bad day once in a while, something doesn't get done. And many of our students are balancing 4 different classes with 4 different Moodle pages and 4 different syllabi and 4 different expectations from the instructor. They may not even know where to find the deadline for all their assignments. So sometimes some grace can be really helpful as students are learning how to navigate. Okay, again, that idea that they're coming to us maybe without having all of those skills just put hard in place, giving them that time to actually develop those skills. Office hour or student hour flexibility is also really important. Making availability in different ways is important because, again, their identities might not allow them to intersect with exactly what we have laid out for them in your class. So another example, I teach a night class and I always make sure to let my Muslim students leave if they need to pray or break their fast. Okay, so understanding that the needs of some students during some periods of time are different than others and accommodating that in a positive way. Okay, so we're going to do this in the chat based on what you have, or you can unmute and speak out loud too. Based on what you've learned so far, how do you think your students' identities could affect your classroom, or have you had that experience? We've got time for maybe 1 or 2 comments.
like I have an experience of teaching. I use program.
Programming, okay, yeah.
So that's kind of like what kind of stuff. So I try to be friendly with all of them, so they can ask questions, they can think from a different aspects. So this helps like you have studies, you have some concepts, but when they put a question, it also helps us to
Yeah.
solve the problem
Right.
with another angle.
Yeah.
So this is the good thing that I understand.
Yeah, that's a great example. And it's a really positive example to think about how students bring in, because they bring in their unique perspectives, that allows us to grow as an instructors and it allows the class to grow. So I always tell my students, you guys are the ones that really make the learning experience. The more that you're able to share and interact and the more you bring to the table, the more we can all learn together. I had a student who says, oh, hey, I'm really interested in this aspect of biochemistry. Do you know anything about it? And that turned into an activity that we did in class. And so that shows like, hey, your passions, what's important to you is important to us. And we can actually learn more from that. So it's a really good example.
Someone online said, what we don't see below the water can affect what we can see above the water.
Yeah, so that's very true. So that link between understanding that sometimes what you see really, we may not even see that relationship with what is below the water. So that's a really important point to think about. So the next topic is our classroom environment. So what about our classroom environment? What can we do to support inclusive teaching and make sure all of our students feel valued and respected? The first thing is to create a welcoming atmosphere and support student sense of belonging. And that starts with you. That starts with you introducing yourself. It starts with you starting conversations with students, making sure that they feel like they can talk to you, learning their names, how to pronounce their names, affirming their identities and their pronouns, understanding and approaching your classroom as an asset with an asset-based approach, saying our students are all important, they're all bringing something unique and valuable to the classroom. Open communication, really thinking about how do you want students to reach you, what different ways can students reach you, making sure that that's really, really apparent to them, and that you might have more than one way for them to reach out can be really valuable. And then growth mindset messaging. So this is another term, if you are unfamiliar with, really just means that we say we want to avoid the idea of a fixed mindset where you come in and you're either, the most common one is math. A lot of people just say, I'm just not good at math. I can't do math. No. Okay. You may feel like you can't do math right now, but that doesn't mean you can't learn to do it. That's a growth mindset. So always telling students and encouraging them to go deeper and farther and making sure that they all know that they belong and they all have the capability from the start, no matter where they came from, they still have the ability to get to where they want to go. That type of messaging, using that with yourself, giving examples is really important. It's okay to say you don't know something or that you failed before. It's okay to admit that and say, hey, but I then really kind of turn things around. I commonly tell my students how I unfortunately failed a pretty big exam in my biophysics class as a graduate student. And I had never failed anything like that before. And I cried, embarrassingly enough. And I went to my professor and I said, I don't know what happened. I couldn't remember this one equation. And so I just couldn't do the rest of the test. And I wouldn't say he was very approachable or very kind when I came to talk to him about it, but I basically decided I was going to turn it around myself. And I came back in and then I got the highest grade in the class on the next exam. So I used that to motivate myself to do better. And instead of what can happen, which is to say, well, I failed this time, I'm never going to get better. I might as well quit or cheat or something like that, right? We always want to encourage students to try again and come up with new ways that they might be able to change things in order to do better. So this is a picture of a really important teaching tip. The link is in your handout on creating a culture of care in the classroom from one of our faculty fellows this year. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because we're getting kind of close to the end here, but I did want to take a minute to stress that we can sort of proactively think about what's going on with our students based on those things that we do see above the water, okay? So even though we can't predict anything, there are some things that we can think about. So here's some examples. If you have someone who has an uncharacteristic decline in their assignment quality, or you know they're just not meeting what you've seen them do before, that might be a time to reach out to them and say, hey, what's going on? Obviously, I know that you can do this, so there's got to be some other reason as to why their performance isn't where, you know, it has been, okay? So being really tuned into the students who's attending class and who's not, making that reach out to them can help overcome and help make sure that they can get to the resources they need. So the last one I want to talk about is how you teach. And this is really thinking about some of these teaching techniques that you can use to help motivate and engage students. This is one of the strongest ways that we can create an inclusive teaching and or learning environment. And in your handout, I talk a little bit about some of those techniques. I also talk a little bit about how to prepare yourself to deal with behavior issues, which is sort of behind or beyond the scope of this. And there are some links for studies and learning skills that you can use that you can either provide for your students or model. So what are some of the basic things that you can do? And I'll give you a couple of really concrete examples. One of them is just to make sure that you dedicate time for questions and discussion. Right, so that's the easiest one. Don't just stand up in the front of the classroom and talk to them. Make room for your student's voice. Providing really clear instructions and expectations. This one's hard too, especially if you feel like you might have any amount of language barrier. Then do it beforehand. Create something where you can read out the instructions and you're providing it in both an oral and a written form for the students. So they are getting it in multiple ways and you feel confident with what it is that you're explaining for tasks. And then think about neurodiversity, how it shows up in the classroom. I have additional resources for you on that as well, if that's something that you would like to know more about. But again, it's a whole nother series of talks. Universal Design for Learning Principles is another great resource that you can go to if you want to think about easy ways to engage students in different ways in terms of the content, engage them in how they showcase what they know. These things are probably more for you as a future faculty member. As a TA, you don't quite have that level of control over your syllabus and sort of maybe all of the learning components of a course. So some of these things you can reflect on for your future. One of the biggest ones is being comfortable with saying, let me get back to you, or I don't know, because it's okay. It's okay that you don't know, okay? And it's okay to just say, let's take a minute and think about it. It's okay to say, let me get back to you, or let's all come back and think about this in the next class period, and we'll start off the class with this great question. Put it back in the hands of the students. You are not going to know everything. You're not going to know everything under pressure. And so it's okay to just take, to recognize that and say, all right, I'm going to come back and we'll talk about this at a different point. Okay. So sort of my exit ticket, what I would like you to think about is, and if we can share out if anyone has any ideas, what's one thing you're already doing to create what you think is an inclusive teaching environment? Or is there one thing that you think you'd like to try? What resonated with you today that you think to yourself, boy, that does sound like something I need to work on or would really help me in my classroom?
I'd like to try making like my study sessions with students like more accessible. It's just very difficult, like just by myself, I post those
Right,
on
yeah.
that just by myself. But finding ways to make things more accessible, like with screen readers and JAWS and things like that, it might prove a bit of a hassle, like to get it all started, but I really would like to try.
Yeah, so that's a great example, is just making improvements, thinking about how do you include more students in the great work that you're doing. Any other ideas?
Yes, one of mine said I asked a lot of questions during lecture and labs and group work, and I find that helps a lot.
Yeah, that's probably one of the number one things I hear from TAs, is that they find the group work to be really successful and asking those questions. The great thing about being a TA and in many of these lab situations is you have less students, and so you really have that opportunity to get engaged with them on a more 1-to-4 type ratio if you go around and talk to your students. Any other ideas?
That's one-on-one sessions separately, so anyone can share their idea that what they are studying, and why they are not progressing.
Yeah, I think one-on-one meetings at availability is really important for our students, because sometimes it draws out things that they might not have been comfortable saying in the classroom. It gives them gives you time to understand what's really going on with them in a different way, and it builds those relationships for the future. So, maybe it ends up with a mentoring type of relationship for you or for them. Yeah, great. Thank you guys for sharing these. Any others? Okay, so I would like to talk a little bit about some of the resources I will leave you with. The main one is our Identity and Inclusive Teaching Guide for TAs. There are a few physical copies, but it is almost all digital links. So this will get sent out to you after this presentation, so you have all of this available to you, and I think Daniel's going to pop it in the chat. We also have an international TA training eSpace, which was developed by one of our graduate students who was an intern in CETL. And basically it focuses on, as an international student, how can you navigate the differences in the educational system in the States prior to getting in the classroom? Because there's some things that are very unique in the US. If you think about even how do you approach an instructor, how do you call them by name? What are the expectations for communicating with students? All of those things might be a little different here in the US versus other countries. And so this has been helpful for students to have some real feedback from real grad students and some additional training prior to actually starting in the classroom. All of our events in CETL are open to graduate students. Please come and attend any of them if you want more detailed look at some teaching techniques and tips. Professional development is really useful if you want to showcase sort of preparing yourself for jobs in the future. So as an example, the Inclusive Teaching Academy covers kind of what we just did, but over the course of a whole semester, right? So we just got a little tiny bit of it, a little flavor. Hopefully you'll carry these conversations with one another later. We don't run that anymore, but what we do have available is an inclusive teaching guide that you can do on your own, that follows a lot of the lessons that we did during the Inclusive Teaching Academy, and I suggest that you check that out. The last thing is the Teaching and Learning Symposium. I'm hoping that all of you can register for it. And I will have this sent out to you as well. There's a QR code for you to register. There's over 20 faculty and students presenting from OU, and we have a fabulous keynote that will be here May 8th. Please join. This is a really great way to network and to talk to other people that care about teaching on campus. And with that, I will take any questions. Are there any?
Not so far.
Okay.
So since it's 1 o'clock and I want to be mindful of everyone's time, I want to again thank Dr. Hosch for her wonderfully engaging session, and for especially on sharing why identity matters in the classroom space and providing actionable steps to ensure that students have a sense of belonging. So if you have any additional questions, please reach out to Dr. Hosch. This is the last session for the Graduate Student Development Series, but as Dr. Hosch explained, there are other things happening on campus, so please look into that. You will receive an evaluation form, so please fill that out. It's probably going out to you right now. That is very helpful for us so that we can continue to provide you the services and the workshops that you need. So with that, thank you for participating, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you.